And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather is showing a front here pushing into the northwest and northern interior, bringing gusty winds becoming more west-southwesterly, or actually south-southwesterly here as the front pushes in with rain and snow, mixed precipitation into the northwest interior, mostly snow off to the northeast there, and then less wind and less rain as you head south here and southwest along the front into the central Aleutian areas. Clouds will continue to thicken and lower Cook Inlet on up into the Mananuska-Susitna Valley areas, and look for periods of snow or just continuous snow over the Tanana Valley. They're starting to mix with freezing rain and or rain here in the central interior. Should stay dry down across Kodiak Island, but there'll be an increase in the clouds there as well. Mostly clear and rather cold here, especially over the northern panhandle tonight. Through the night tonight there for the southeast coast, as high pressure close to the area there keeps it dry. Otherwise, for Monday, we've got high pressure holding there east of the panhandle, so it'll be mostly clear there for the southeast coast through the day tomorrow with a fair amount of sunshine. Otherwise, drying out on the north slope there due to downsloping winds behind the front off the Brooks Range that'll extend out to the Arctic coast. High wind warnings continue here for the northern Bering Sea, right up along the western Seward Peninsula of the northwest coast. It's low now, it's starting to track eastward. And so there'll be a pretty good wintry mix here all the way from the Susitna Valley into the central interior, extending back out toward the coastal areas, and mostly rain here, southern Kuskokwim Valley down into Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. And then for the day on, Tuesday, see this low tracking eastward there, coming right on just north of the central Arctic coast there. That's going to bring the winds back around to the west and basically west-northwest winds. Not quite as strong, but still pretty gusty there with colder air coming back in. So snowfall levels back down to the deck here into the central interior with periods of snow along this fairly active trough axis swinging through the central part of the state, then scattering out to showers out toward the southwest coast, and dry down here with some clearing for the Aleutians. Risk of some showers for the Alaska Peninsula. Basically dry in this area. Westerly flow keeps it dry in Kodiak Island. And variably cloudy south central Alaska with the snow back toward the Alaska Range. Another system here out to the west that will be tracking eastward into the coastline on Wednesday night, and then later on taking a turn to the southeast. For the southeast coast, weakening front pushes across the panhandle, and much weakened front, but that'll be holding together enough to produce some areas of rain there. And for the coastal water forecasts for Monday, wind still north, 10 to 15 knots here for the central and south coast, light and variable up along the north coast. Northerlies, 15 to 20 knots for the northern, central, and southern inside waters there, seas running 3 to 4 feet. And then for Tuesday, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots here for the central and south coast. South to east winds at 20 knots on the north coast. Lynn Canal, southeast 25, gusting 40 knots. Southeast at 20 for Passage Canal, Clarence Strait, southerlies at 15. For Prince William Sound, variable winds 15 knots for Monday. Variable winds at 10 knots for the North Gulf Coast. Western North Gulf Coast, southwest at 20. Cook Inlet, south winds 30 knots, seas 7 feet, southwest at 30 for Kamishak Bay, and 25 there for the Barren Islands. And then for Tuesday, still pretty brisk winds here in the inlet, southwest at 30 knots with seas 7 to 9 feet. Gale force westerlies back into Kamishak Bay out of the west at 40 knots with 10-foot seas west at 30 for the Barren Islands. Gale warnings for the western North Gulf Coast. West at 35 knots and small craft advisories for Prince William Sound and the eastern North Gulf Coast. Looking at west winds in those areas, 25 to 30 knots. 10-foot seas here on the coast. Prince William Sound seas will be about 4 feet. And for Kodiak Island, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots on Monday. Southwest 25 for Bristol Bay. And west to south winds 20 to 30 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. For Tuesday, west winds 25 to 30 knots for the peninsula. west at 30 for Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island, also looking at west winds 30 knots, 7 to 8 foot seas. Eastern Aleutians, west to southwest winds at 25 to 30 tomorrow, west 25 knot winds for Adak and Atka, and gale warnings for the western Aleutians, west southwest winds 30 to 35 knots. And then for Tuesday, gale warnings Kiska to Shemya, west southwest winds 35 knots, and Chitka Island southwest at 30 knots, Adak and Atka over toward Unalaska Island, west southwest winds 25 knots. And for the southwest coast, 30 knot winds out of the southwest tomorrow with seas 9 to 11 feet. Gale warning St. Lawrence Island, winds coming down to 35 knots out of the southwest and about southwest at 30 for Norton Sound. You can see 10 to 12 foot seas here all the way down along the Yukon Delta coast as well as the Kuskokwim Delta coast, looking at 11 foot seas rolling right in. Southwest 40 knots there for the St. Matthew Island area with 25 foot seas. And then for the day Tuesday, west winds 40 knots there for Norton Sound with 12 foot seas. West at 11 or west at 35, the St. Lawrence Island area seas at 11 feet. Back to 40 knots out of the west for the Yukon Delta coast with 10 foot seas, and 35 knot westerlies with 13 foot seas for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. 35 knot winds also for St. Matthew Island, southwest at 30 for the Pribilofs. And for the Chukchi Sea tomorrow, pretty strong winds continuing south 40 to 45 knots with seas running 12 to 13 feet. South at 35 knots there for the western Arctic coast. South winds 30 knots for the central coast with 6 foot seas. And for the east side here, southwest 20 to 25 knots with 4 to 5 foot seas. And for the day on Tuesday, central Arctic coast, south winds 25 knots, seas 5 feet. And that forecast extends all the way to Demarcation Point. Otherwise, southwest winds for the western Arctic coast, it's 30 knots with 7 to 11 foot seas. Gale warnings for the Chukchi Sea, west-southwest 35 knots, seas 10 to 11 feet.